Okay, I get this one all the time, particularly with regards to the dating of the Exodus. Today, we talk about the historical context error on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. The historical context error is a particularly vexing exegetical fallacy that seems to persist within Christian circles. And it seems to be particularly bad around certain emotionally charged issues like origins or the Exodus. The idea of a historical context error is when the items or events from different historical periods are juxtaposed, creating an anachronism of chronological inconsistency. Now, the following is an example I get frequently, and I'm going to paraphrase it here. Quote, Joseph settles his family in the land of Ramses, Genesis 47:11. And that predates Ramses II by centuries, so the land had to be named after someone or something other than Ramses II, end quote. Now, the problem here is that the context of the author of Genesis is being juxtaposed with the context of Joseph's life. There are two different contexts to consider, but they're being mixed up. We know that the author of Genesis used what was called retrojections in several places in the book. A retrojection is when an author uses a term that is common to his everyday context and applies that term to the past to make the concepts more understandable for the audience. We do the same thing in our writing. For example, we might say, quote, Queen Elizabeth served as an automotive mechanic during World War II, end quote. But she wasn't queen during World War II. She was Princess Elizabeth. However, writers will use this retrojection because most people living today knew her as Queen Elizabeth, not as a princess. Using retrojections makes subject matter easier to understand for contemporary audiences. Likewise, Genesis mentions the term Pharaoh to mean the king of Egypt, yet that term was not used until the reign of Tutmosis III, almost 100 years after Joseph, and that term was most certainly not used at the time of Abraham, Genesis 12:15. Similarly, when Tubal-Cain is said to be, quote, the forger of all implements, bronze and iron, end quote, Genesis 4:22, that's a retrojection, because iron was not forged until the Iron Age, not before the flood. However, the author of Genesis wants the reader to know that Tubal-Cain is in Anatolia, or modern-day Turkey. Yet people consistently make the mistake of forgetting about the historical context of the writer, and thinking that whatever is being described in the text is identical to the historical context of the person being written about. It's a naive approach to the text that would posit, when Shakespeare wrote Antony and Cleopatra, that the French word adieu was literally what Queen Cleopatra spoke. So then, when we return to our example in Genesis 47:11, we need to understand that the writer of Genesis was writing according to what he knew in his context. From the toponyms, Egyptian loanwords, and retrojections, we understand that Genesis could not have been written any earlier than the 19th dynasty. So that is the earliest context that we have for the author of the book of Genesis. Moreover, we know that the name Ramses, Ramasu, two S's, was not extant in the Egyptian language prior to the last years of Dynasty 18. And the land of Goshen was not known as the land of Ramses until the reign of Ramses II. So, the reference to the land of Ramses in Genesis is a retrojection. And attributing that toponym to the time of Joseph is a historical context error. So then, how does one avoid a historical context error? Well, you try to figure out the historical context of the writer, figure out the context of the subject being written about, and then ascertain the extra-biblical and archaeological data. And from those three data points, you can figure out which context belongs to whom. In conclusion, the historical context error results from a confusion between the writer and his subject, resulting in an inappropriate juxtaposing of contexts. So, we hope you found that interesting and learned something. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.